Hi, welcome to Mental Floss Video. Today we're going to talk about Sesame Street. Maybe we'll even tell you how to get there. Actually, I shouldn't promise that because we aren't going to tell you how to get there, but let's get started. We might as well start at the beginning. Many of your favorite Sesame Street Muppets once looked quite different from how they do now. Some of them even had different names. Like Cookie Monster, in 1966, Jim Henson was hired to create a snack food commercial for 3 different General Foods: Wheel, Crowns, and Flutes. He created 3 characters: the Wheel Stealer, the Crown Grabber, and the Flute Snatcher. The Wheel Stealer is the one you'd recognize today as Cookie Monster, who debuted on Sesame Street in 1969. As for the snack commercial, it never actually aired, but the character did also star in an IBM training video and a Frito-Lay commercial during the 1960s. It's good to know that even Jim Henson wasn't above selling out a little bit. We can also thank food commercials for Big Bird. Henson drew a design for a tall walking bird for a Stouffer's food commercial in 1963. That commercial also never happened, but this was the jumping off point for Big Bird. In season 1 of Sesame Street, the feathers looked a little more shaggy than they do now. In fact, Carol Spinney, who played Big Bird from the beginning, once said, "He didn't look too keen. I thought he was one of the ugliest things I'd ever seen." Oscar the Grouch, meanwhile, was orange during the first season of the show and magenta in an early sketch design. In the second season, he was green, and thereby doomed me to a childhood full of Oscar the Grouch jokes. Partly because my last name was Green, and partly because I was just perpetually filthy. Sesame Street explained the color change by saying that Oscar took a trip to Swamp Mushy Muddy where he turned green. Oscar has since clarified, "Actually, I'm still orange. If I ever took a bath, you'd see that. This is mold and moss." The Count used to have some different supernatural skills. He first appeared on Sesame Street during its 4th season in 1972, and in his debut episode, he used hypnotism to stun Bert and Ernie. Nowadays, he's much nicer. If he can hypnotize his friends, he chooses not to. But Elmo's history is probably the most mysterious of any character on this list. Carol Spinney, who I mentioned earlier, claimed that he performed a version of Elmo during the early 1970s, but no design for the puppet existed until the late 70s. Also, some sources say that Elmo was originally known as Baby Monster, but that's a name that was used for various Muppets over the years, as well as young Lady Gaga fans. Regardless, Elmo became a regular character in the 1980s and gained his signature voice in 1984. Mr. Snuffleupagus has been around since 1971, and his appearance hasn't changed too much over the years, although he did used to have yellow eyes. His identity is what changed. So originally, Snuffleupagus only shared the screen with Big Bird. The audience didn't know if he was an imaginary friend or not, and sometimes people in Big Bird's life would kind of doubt that he had this shaggy, elephantine best friend. Some of the people behind the scenes, however, worried that communicated that people in Big Bird's life didn't believe him when he was telling the truth, which might suggest to a child that grown-ups wouldn't believe their reports of serious incidents. And so in 1985, all of Sesame Street met Mr. Snuffleupagus. It's really beautiful, actually. Big Bird imagined him into reality.
Short story time. In April of 2002, Elmo testified before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health and Human Services and Education. Republican Congressman from California, Randy Duke Cunningham, asked Elmo to do so. The goal was to convince the subcommittee to allot $2 million in federal funding for music research as well as instruments for schools. So Elmo put on a suit and a red tie, looking sharp. Then he sat next to a friend, Joe Lamond. Lamond was the president and CEO of International Music Products Association, which had previously teamed up with Sesame Street to create music-oriented programs for children. Lamond did a lot of the heavy lifting, but Elmo chimed in. Like, he said that music helped him learn the alphabet thanks to the ABC song. Apparently he plays the violin too. This guy. And he claimed to get a 1550 on his SATs. That's higher than what I got. But then he said he was kidding. Hey, can Elmo get in trouble for lying in front of a congressional committee? And after Lamont said that children who get a music education are less likely to be involved in gangs, Elmo concurred, saying, "Elmo is in the music program, and Elmo isn't in a gang." A compelling case. Ultimately, in 2003, Congressman Cunningham announced that $225,000 worth of funding had been approved for research on music and the brain. Good job, Elmo. There are some non-Muppets who have helped make Sesame Street the powerhouse show that it is. So let's learn about a few of them. Joan Gans Cooney co-founded the Children's Television Workshop. That's the nonprofit organization that created Sesame Street. Her granddaughter's first words were Big Bird, and she has a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Her Children's Television Workshop co-founder was Lloyd N. Morissette. He was particularly inspired by his 3-year-old daughter Sarah, who loved television. Her memorization of TV jingles may have sparked the initial idea that children could be educated through songs on Sesame Street. John Stone worked on the show for decades, and we can thank him for helping create Big Bird and Cookie Monster. It's said that he had something to do with getting Jim Henson on board Sesame Street. They worked together on a Cinderella project in the 1960s. Stone wasn't a fan of the words to the Sesame Street theme song. He thought they were cliché. The song was composed by Joe Raposo. He wrote many other Sesame Street songs, as well as the theme songs to The Electric Company and Three's Company. The current executive producer of the show is Carol Lynn Parente. She started as a production assistant in the 1990s, so if you're looking for a job on Sesame Street, maybe that's the place to start. The actress Loretta Long has played Susan since the very beginning. Apparently, the auditioning process for the show wasn't totally organized. John Stone actually once called casting completely haphazard, but Loretta Long got the gig after singing I'm a Little Teapot. There were kids watching and they stood up to sing along, so she was cast. Will Lee played the local grocer Mr. Hooper. The actor died in 1982, and the creative team decided to have the character pass away as well. They met with child psychologists to ensure that they addressed everything properly. The episode was called Farewell, Mr. Hooper, and Carol Spinney has said, I think it was one of the best things we ever did. Which brings me to the final fact, also sad and also involving Carol Spinney. We've mentioned Jim Henson a couple times so far. He was hugely important in creating the Muppets who live on Sesame Street, and he passed away in 1990. Carol Spinney made an appearance at the funeral as Big Bird. He sang Kermit's famous song, Bein' Green. It's on YouTube if for some reason you want to be the saddest you've ever been.
Hey guys, I'm back! Anyway, let's dive right in. You don't have the longest running children's TV show without a few rumors popping up over the years, so now it's time for a couple Sesame Street misconceptions. You could have guessed that. Jim Henson's death apparently sparked rumors that Sesame Street was going to kill off a beloved character, Ernie. This was after the Farewell Mr. Hooper episode, so a Sesame Street death wasn't unheard of. According to Snopes, people heard that Ernie would either die of a disease or have a traffic accident, but none of that was ever in the plans. Snopes traced the rumor getting out of control to the Manchester, New Hampshire Sunday News. A college student had heard the rumors, so he wrote a letter to the editors, which got published, totally snowballing the whole thing, which is why it's important not to gossip. Speaking of Ernie, there's a misconception that he's named after a character from It's a Wonderful Life, along with Bert. In the film, there's a police officer named Bert and a cab driver named Ernie. Jerry Jewell, a head writer for the Muppets, once took it upon himself to correct this rumor in writing. He recalled a conversation with John Stone, who you'll remember from earlier had a lot to do with the creation of Sesame Street characters. Jewell wrote, Stone assured me that Ernie and Bert were named one day when he and Jim were studying the prototype puppets. They decided that one of them looked like an Ernie and the other one looked like a Bert. The movie character names are purely coincidental. And the Cookie Monster is not the Veggie Monster. In 2005, there was a lot of news coverage about Cookie Monster giving up his cookie habit for vegetables. Ronald McDonald even made a statement saying, kudos to Cookie Monster for trying new things. It's very nice of Ronald. But here's the truth. The show did spend some time in season 36 focusing on healthy eating and exercise. That included having Cookie Monster eat fruits and vegetables, but his name remains the same and he still loves cookies. He did participate in a new song, A Cookie is a Sometime Food, but I don't see anything too controversial about that, but you let me know if I'm wrong.
We're going to finish up with a scientific study about Sesame Street. The paper is Early Childhood Education by Massive Open Online Courses, Lessons from Sesame Street, written by Melissa S. Kearney and Philip B. Levine, and it was published in 2015 by the National Bureau of Economic Research. The authors of the paper argue that Sesame Street was the first MOOC, so they wanted to find out if a child being exposed to Sesame Street at a young age affected their life, from education level to employment. So how did they do this decades after the fact? Well, it turns out that TV technology in 1969 wasn't perfect. Shocking, I know, but good for science. And in 1969, the show primarily aired on ultra-high frequency channels, and UHF is a signal that many TVs at the time didn't get. Most got very high frequency instead. Just physical distance to the transmission meant that other households didn't get Sesame Street. Without getting into too much detail, all you need to know is that 2/3 of the population in the US lived in a location with access to Sesame Street at first. The researchers could analyze which households were physically able to watch the show. So they found data for those who were preschool age in 1969. Then they used the 1980, 1990, and 2000 US censuses to see where these kids ended up. The 1980 census data told them whether the child was in school, graduated, or in a grade they should be, given their age. They found exposed cohorts of students with better reception capabilities to Sesame Street were more likely to be attending a grade that is appropriate for their age. This effect was particularly pronounced for boys, Black, non-Hispanic children, and those living in economically disadvantaged areas. The 1990 census data was used to see whether they dropped out of high school, graduated, or went to college. And the 2000 data was to see whether they were employed, had an hourly wage, or in poverty. But there wasn't statistically significant evidence that early exposure to Sesame Street was correlated with a difference in education level or job outcomes. The researchers concluded that Sesame Street is the biggest yet least costly early childhood intervention in US history.
Thanks for watching Mental Floss video, which is made with the help of all of these nice people. Please subscribe to our channel if you want to see more Scatterbrained videos, and don't forget to be awesome.